to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. All right. Hello, you good people. Welcome to Life on Earth. And you know the score by now. I think we're up to episode, where are we at? Episode 19. How many times have I said, you know, Ayn Rand said in 1976, formally I call my philosophy objectivism, but informally I call it a philosophy for living on Earth. Hence the name of this show, Life on Earth. Thank you for joining us on this planet, hurling through space, enjoying this
it's so fun.
Life on Earth. Again, if objectivism is a philosophy for living on Earth, it means we've got the rule book, the tool book, the manual for successful life. It stands to reason that objectivists, fans of Ayn Rand, should be among the most successful, the happiest, the most joyful, the most benevolent, the most optimistic, I might say, people on Earth. Boy, that's a tall order. That's going to be a tough one to justify, but we need to talk. Yeah. We need to talk about that. This week, it's new book week. Look at this. Look at this.
Woo, so fresh.
I started out with the audiobook version of it.
Smells like a new book.
This is Steven Pinker's latest and greatest, Rationality. What it is, why it seems scarce, why it matters. Now, I know some of you out there are saying, oh, wait a minute, this is Steven Pinker's idea of rationality. In objectivism, we have rationality not as a sort of scientific concept. We have it as a virtue. We have it as the fundamental virtue of reason. Why would I want to read Steven Pinker's book, Rationality, with its 390 pages? This is a damn good book. I'm not quite done with it yet, so I am not here to do a review of this book, but it's going to come up in our conversation today in important ways. Absolutely worth reading. Again, I started out with the audiobook, reading it on Audible, but it's so good I decided I had to go out and buy the Dead Tree version, and that's what I have right here, so I can start doing markups. We will do a show about this book, Rationality, what it is, why it seems scarce, why it matters. We will do an episode called something like Rationality, what's great about the book, where it could be improved, and what you should get out of it, which is really the only important part. What's the good stuff in the book? See, I'm not going to review the book today. I'm going to finish reading it.
Yeah, Robert says, quote, Steven Pinker is wicked smart. And
this is true. This is true.
Really, really quite smart.
Yes. What I'm eager to discuss today is optimism. And why? Why do you want to hear this? The answer is pessimism. See, pessimism is getting me down, and I need all the pessimists out there to cut it out. Except I don't really need you to cut it out. What I need to do is to convince you that despite all of the good reasons you have, all of the concerns you have with regard to the state of the world, pessimism is not the final answer. Now, arguably, depending on how you define your terms, optimism is not the final answer either. So we need to get to that. More than answering the pessimists, I need to reestablish that I am an unabashed optimist. And I need to validate that before the court of final appeal. And we all know what the court of final appeal is. It's obviously God. Oh, no, wait, it's not God. It's obviously reality.
Oh, I thought it was consensus.
But even more important than reality is consensus. Exactly right. So I need to reaffirm optimism before the court of final appeal. And that means all of you out there in the chat. And I already see Mary Aline is online. Jennifer is in the chat. The trillionaire has come here to give me kudos because I know he agrees with everything I said. No, he disagrees with everything I said, but that's cool. Okay. Either way, it's all good. And Gerard is here. Excellent to see you in the chat. Speaking of the chat, we'll just knock this out real quick, even though we're only 4 minutes into the hour. You need to be a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK. Become a member, go to the website. Our gracious producer will post the link in just a moment, so I don't even need to read aynrandcenter.co.uk to you. It's spelled funny anyway. You know, the Brits spell center backwards, or rather with the R and the E reversed. So there you go, right there in the chat. Click on it. Here's the thing. The reason I bring it up right at the beginning, 4 minutes into the show now, 5 minutes, 22 seconds. You can super chat. You know, we've got a Sunday show where we can't do super chat because we don't have 1,000 subscribers, but ARC UK certainly does. You can super chat. You can put a dollar value on your comment or
that
question.
is so cool. That is so cool.
Your question can grow balls of joy. Your question can have extra cojones by putting a couple dollars on it. Anyway, it just makes it more fun, makes it stand out.
Even for the ladies.
Even for the, well, a lot of the ladies around here have more cojones than a lot of the men. I shouldn't say that. I don't mean to pick on our boys, but listen. I am reading Steven Pinker's latest book, Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters. But before he released this book, he released a book called Enlightenment Now. Great book. Talks about why we need an enlightenment perspective now in I think it was 2018. Great book. Enlightenment Now should be read by all of you who say you appreciate the Enlightenment, that you are in favor of a second Renaissance, as it were.
A second Renaissance.
But before that book came out, his previous book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, why progress has continued through the present and why the future looks amazing. I don't remember the exact subtitle. I have to look that up. But let me quote from that previous book. Again, 2 books back, Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature. Tribal warfare in the past was 9 times as deadly as war and genocide in the 20th century. The murder rate in medieval Europe was more than 30 times what it is today. Slavery, sadistic punishments, frivolous executions were unexceptional features of life for millennia, and then were suddenly abolished. Wars between developed countries have vanished, and even in the developing world, wars kill a fraction of the numbers they did just a few decades ago. Rape, hate crimes, deadly riots, child abuse, all substantially down. If you haven't read Better Angels of Our Nature, there is a good hour and 15-minute talk by Steven Pinker on it, so you don't have to read the whole book. Link is in my show notes. Show notes are on my Facebook wall. You can watch that right after the show. Charles Kenny of the Center for Global Development writes, 4.9 billion people, the considerable majority of the planet, live in countries where GDP, the gross domestic product, has increased more than 5-fold in the last 50 years. Those countries include India, with an economy nearly 10 times larger than it was in 1960. You know, I remember that when I was a kid. India was an underdeveloped country. Now it's one of the great nations. Also, Indonesia, which increased its economy 13 times in the last 50 years. China has increased its economy 17 times. Thailand, 22 times larger than it was in 1960. It's crazy. I see things that are made in Thailand. And like, Thailand doesn't make stuff, but it's 2021. Where have you been, Robert Nasir? Thailand makes stuff. Their economy is 22 times larger than it was 3 years before I was born.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my mom told me, you better eat all of your vegetables on your plate, Amy.
People are starving in China.
Or in Africa, or in Ethiopia, or however.
And we would invariably say, okay, Mom, send them my leftovers.
Yeah, so I always imagined putting like my soggy canned peas, which I didn't like to eat at the time, into a box and send it to Ethiopia.
Well, they would appreciate it. Charles Kenny of the Center for Global Development goes on, just one more paragraph. And 5.1 billion, one more sentence rather, 5.1 billion people live in countries where we know incomes have more than doubled since 1960, and 4.1 billion, well, more than half the planet, live in countries where average incomes have tripled or more. One more from the Brookings Institution. The rise of emerging economies has led to a dramatic fall in global poverty. It's estimated that between 2005 and 2010, in 5 years, the total number of poor people in the world fell by nearly 500 million, from over 1.3 billion in 2005 to under 900 million in 2010. Poverty reduction of this magnitude is unparalleled in history. This was in 5 years. Never before have so many people been lifted out of poverty over such a brief time.
And now Ethiopia tells me that they're still struggling. However, they are the largest economy by GDP in East Africa. However, they still remain one of the world's poorest countries, but they're no longer experiencing famine.
They're no longer experiencing famine.
Well, that's a step in the right direction.
One more excerpt. I'm going to go to the new book, Rationality. What it is, why it seems scarce, why it matters, from Steven Pinker. Rationality and Material Progress. The book is about rationality. How could people be getting more rational? Well, anyway, we'll get to that. Rationality and Material Progress. Though the availability bias, I think you all know what that is, right? The stuff that you see all the time, you tend to give it more weight than it deserves. Things that you see in the news, you think happen all the time, when in reality, they rarely happen. Though the availability bias hides it from us, human progress is an empirical fact. When we look beyond the headlines to the trend lines, we find that humanity overall is healthier, richer, longer lived, better fed, better educated, and safer from war, murder, and accidents than in decades and in centuries past. He validates all of that in the earlier book and then updates it for this book. It is unquestionable. The first podcast, no, not the first podcast ever in history, the first podcast I ever did.
That I ever did.
And right from day one, Amy was my co-host. The first episode of 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir back in March of 2020 was terrible. I had no idea what I was doing. If you think this podcast is a little rough, there's a link to it, but you shouldn't watch it. It really wasn't that good.
Well, I was pretty good, actually.
Amy was good. She's always good.
No, I mean, we had a learning curve, but that should serve as inspiration for those people who want to do their own podcasts, so they can look at us and say, hey, wow, they've actually improved, and so can I. Yes.
That episode was called episode number 0. And it was our preview episode. And the topic of the episode was, unofficially, since it wasn't in the title, optimism. And even back then, I was running the numbers. In 1966, life expectancy was only 56 years. By 2016, it was 72, up 29%. Infant mortality. We don't even think of infant mortality anymore, but back then in 66, again, this is 3 years after I was born, 113 per 1,000, 11.3 per 100 babies died as part of the process of childbirth. Down 72% by 2016. Average incomes rose from $3,698, obviously that's worldwide, to over $17,469, an increase of 372%. I went through a whole bunch of statistics. You can find them. They're out on the web if you want to see them. Have things gotten better in the last 10 years? Almost unbelievably so. Have things gotten better in the last 50 years? Almost miraculously so. It's almost inconceivable. It's why I use the word miracles. I don't really believe in miracles, but you have heard me say before, and I'll say it again, we are surrounded by miracles, not least of which is ourselves. What I really mean are the products of a division of labor society, the products of reason, the things which on a deserted island, no matter how smart and how rational I was, I could never in a million years have created a fraction of what I am surrounded by, of what I can walk into a department store and buy for a $20 bill. Miracles, frigging miracles. Can I get an amen? Somebody in the chat, give me an amen if you have any sense of what has happened in the last 100 years.
I've got to give a hallelujah, amen, thank you, Jesus, to Mary Aline and Jean, who has given us some lovely super chat money. So thank you so very much.
Love to see. There's an active conversation. If you're not on the chat, if you're running this on YouTube and listening, but you're not looking at the chat, all sorts of fun there. You could engage, you could get into, you could be part of the conversation there. It's pretty raucous. We did send you to the membership link. You should already be members of the Ayn Rand Center UK, but you can continue to support the organization with those little super chats. It makes a difference and lets us know, hey, we're getting the love. I love the expression, what does that look like? If the optimistic perspective was true, what would that look like? Well, depends on what optimism is. So you knew it was coming. We need a definition. What are we even talking about? The concise Oxford Dictionary, this is the concise version of the Oxford English Dictionary, says optimism, 1, hopefulness and confidence about the future or the success of something. Number 2, and here's where I get into trouble. Here comes trouble. Number 2, in philosophy, the doctrine, especially as set forth by Leibniz, that this world is the best of all possible worlds. And alternately, the belief that good must ultimately prevail over evil in the universe. This is from Oxford. Now, I went to Merriam-Webster and kind of got the same answer. Number 2, they start with number 2, or rather, I'm going to start with number 2. An inclination to put the most favorable construction upon actions and events, or, and here's to the definition that matters, to anticipate the best possible outcome. What was their definition number 1? Why do I keep getting in trouble over this issue? Definition number 1, a doctrine that this world is the best possible world. Now, obviously, that's a place where I part company with Leibniz and Pangloss from Voltaire's Candide, who makes the Leibniz argument that, yes, all is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. In a certain sense, in the metaphysical sense, this is the best of all possible worlds because in reality, there is only one world. And in that sense, there is only one possible world. But as we know from Ayn Rand's essay, The Metaphysical and the Man-Made, different possible outcomes were possible. Yes. It's just those other worlds aren't out there. When people chose to do good things, they chose to do bad things, they made mistakes, whatever it was. Yeah, that's the world.
If my memory serves, Voltaire, whom I love and I will always love, he's my my dead philosopher, animal spirit. He wrote, I believe, it was Candide, basically making fun of that whole idea. It's the best of the best possible worlds by Leibniz.
Exactly right. In Candide, the character Candide represents Voltaire's more rational perspective, and the character Pangloss, who talks about the best of all possible worlds, is Voltaire putting Leibniz into the story. So that's why he gets those lines that kind of make us laugh, even though in a way they seem optimistic, they're really not. If you take this perspective that we don't live in a multiverse, which incidentally is true, the quantum physicists are just using that interpretation, and the more rational among them don't actually believe that there are multiple universes out there. But if there's only one world, then this is the best of all possible worlds. It's also the worst of all possible. It's the only possible world. Again, not taking into account human action, which could be different and sort of, in a sense, could be described as a different possible world. So that's why I get in trouble with that, the philosophic idea. But leaving aside philosophic optimism, which seems like a strange thing to do in a philosophy-oriented group, but leaving that aside for a moment, optimism, hopefulness, and forget hopefulness, that sounds wishy-washy. Confidence about the future or success of something, or going to Merriam-Webster, anticipate the best possible outcome. Why do I anticipate the best possible outcome? Why do I have confidence about the future or success of something? Didn't Leonard Peikoff say flat out, we are not optimists?
Right.
Well, he did. In his lecture, Certainty and Happiness, Achieving Success in Thought and Action, which is reproduced almost word for word in the chapter Happiness, chapter 9 in OPAR, Objectivism and the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. Leonard Peikoff says, the intrinsicist and the subjectivist, whatever their disagreements, the two schools lead to the same result. They knock mankind off the road of joy into the gutter of suffering. This leads most men to conclude that happiness is impossible and that life by nature is hell. Harsh words. He goes on, Ayn Rand, by contrast, advocating as she does an objective approach to ethics, holds that pleasure is moral. Happiness, therefore, is not only possible, but is the normal condition of man. Ayn Rand calls this conclusion, which is essential to the objectivist worldview, the benevolent universe premise. Now, here's where this matters for our conversation. He goes on a few paragraphs later. The benevolent universe premise has nothing to do with optimism if this means Leibniz's idea that all is for the best. A great many things in the human realm are clearly for the worst. Nor does the premise mean that the truth will prevail unless one adds the critical word. Ultimately, we have to get back to that. Nor is benevolence the attitude of a Pollyanna. We had a whole episode called Pollyanna. It is not the pretense that there is always a chance of success, even in those situations where there isn't any. The corrective to all these errors, however, is not pessimism, which is merely another form of pretense. The corrective is realism, the recognition of reality, along with the knowledge of life that this brings. The knowledge that happiness, though scarce, is no miracle. It is scarce because it's a culmination that only a demanding cause, moral and philosophical, can produce. But it is no miracle because when the cause is enacted, its effect follows naturally and inevitably. So, yes, Leonard Peikoff does say, the benevolent universe premise has nothing to do with optimism if this means Leibniz's idea that all is for the best. Well, obviously, when I talk about optimism, that's not what I mean. So there we go. Sorry, one moment, folks. A little technical difficulty here. Why is that not powered? Oh, can you click the switch on that power strip, please?
Oh, why, sure.
All right. Sorry about that, folks. I'm watching the chat here on YouTube, and the screen on which that normally appears was going dim.
I came back after disappearing suspiciously.
Well, that's good because Tazy has joined the chat, and she's been saucy lately. So I'm fully expecting the conversation. I mean, the trillionaire is already in there,
and
raising
and
the waters. So the waves.
Yeah, so we have Mary Aline again with $2 for chat. She says, hallelujah, brothers and sisters.
There it is. There's the amen I asked for. I knew Mary Aline.
And Kathleen.
In more ways than one. Thank you.
With another £2 here. One night in Bangkok
and the hard men crumble. Yep. Not much between despair and ecstasy.
That's right.
It's kind of appropriate to the objectivist community, the lyrics of that song by Murray Head.
Yeah, it's
originally part of the Broadway play Chess, but became a big hit on the radio.
Yeah, well, except that the musical was not a big hit.
No?
No.
Oh, you've looked it up. I see.
I looked it up.
And here I was going by memory because the 80s, were the best time ever.
Yes.
So I like the expression, what does that look like?
Wait a minute. So
are we back to the chat here? Okay,
well,
what do we got?
The trillionaire keeps mentioning this person, or I don't know if it's a person, Trump.
Trump.
Have you ever heard of this? Is that a person?
Like a Trump card.
Oh.
When somebody says, I disagree with you, we just say, well, I'm an objectivist. That's my Trump card, and you're obviously wrong.
Oh, all right.
Or are you talking about something else?
All right. No, I think that's what the Trump campaign pays me for. So somebody is like
he's bringing up the president, the former president. Yeah.
Wait, who?
The loser, the guy who lost.
Wait. Are you talking about? Wait. No. Wait. Are you talking about Donald Trump, the game show host?
Yeah, the guy who lost the House of Republicans to the Democrats. The guy who lost the Senate to the Democrats. And, just as a coupe de grace on top, the whipped cream on top is that he lost the White House to the Democrats.
Oh my gosh. Oh wait. So it's it's the game show host. Okay. All right.
Of course, we're just being silly.
Thanks for bringing up
Donald Trump saved us from
Trump, or the verb Trump.
Donald Trump saved us from Hillary Clinton being president of the United States. And that is not nothing. Well, you're laughing, but I'm not. I'm serious.
I know you are, Robert. But
I have a
these
list,
guys-
and I have a list of all
Yeah.
of Donald Trump's great accomplishments.
I know you do.
You know that I keep that list. He moved the embassy to
Yes.
Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He put Nikki Haley in charge of the UN, or the United States position of the UN.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to go on to all of Donald Trump's great accomplishments, but they were substantial. And so when people say, oh, you only know what's bad about Donald Trump, but why don't you ever praise him? Believe me, I can do that. I can match you chapter and verse.
Robert knows more than you do.
No, I don't really, but I know for the stuff that's actually real, the reality, that I can do it. I don't know why you're dragging me into Donald Trump stuff. Cut that out. So we're talking about optimism.
Oh, yes, optimism. Yay.
And what I want to say, what I'm going to say is I like the expression, what does that look like? I recommend that if you don't use that expression a lot, you should start peppering your language with it. What does that look like? It came up the other day when Donald Trump came up. And I asked one of our regulars here, well, if I were to get behind, not Trump per se, but the right, what would that look like? What would I actually do? And I think that's a great question to ask yourself, whether you're already supporting the right or not. Because believe me, there's nothing I want to do more than fight Joe Biden. And I just haven't figured out how to do that while Donald Trump's in my way. But the question is, what does that look like? So forget the politics, forget the politics, get out of the politics.
Oh, what politics?
In regard to optimism.
Yes, optimism.
What does that look like?
Well,
when you're considering any normative proposition, anything you should do, any change you should make, anything you advocate should happen. Normative, normal, shoulds. With any normative proposition, you should ask that question, what does that look like? What out there in reality or in my life, in practice, real, day to day, what would that look like? So what would it look like?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
You know what that question kind of implies? It implies that as a human being, I actually have the power, the wherewithal, the skills to make something happen in reality. So when I say, Amy, what would that look like? I have all of these concepts and all this experience and knowledge and skill sets and all of this at my disposal to come up with an answer to that, to use my imagination, to visualize what would that look like? Well,
that's power. That's empowering. But I use that for a different reason. That's a great reason. Anything empowering is a good thing. The reason I ask the question is I want to know, does this even have anything to do with reality? This keeps me grounded. Now consider this. Some of you will recognize this quote. Fight for the value of your person. Fight for the virtue of your pride. Fight for the essence of that which is man, for his sovereign, rational mind. Fight with the radiant certainty and the absolute rectitude of knowing that yours is the morality of life, and that yours is the battle for any achievement, any value, any grandeur, any goodness, any joy that has ever existed on earth.
That's some moral fire right there.
Now here's the question. Having heard John Galt tell you to do that, what does that look like? See, I know this. I know that fight can include some political and cultural advocacy. It can include writing letters to your politicians and to news editors. It can include attending speeches and participating in rallies. It can include engaging in philosophic conversations and sharing books and articles and essays and other resources. But that's not the whole picture. Not by a long shot. Fight for the value of your person. Fight for the virtue of your pride. Fight for the essence of that which is man, for his sovereign, rational mind. Fight with the radiant certainty and the absolute rectitude of knowing that yours is the morality of life, and that yours is the battle for any achievement, any value, any grandeur, any goodness, any joy that has ever existed on this earth. What does that look like? It doesn't look like trolling. It doesn't look like dank memes. It doesn't look like anger, unless it's righteous anger to a purpose.
Yes.
Fighting for the future means living in the future, means living your life. What did Ayn Rand say? Anyone who fights for the future lives in it today. That's why I say political advocacy matters, and I do a lot of it, but it's not the whole picture, not by a long shot. I don't even think that's the biggest, most important, most substantial, most effective aspect of human action. You know what's bigger? What's bigger than fighting evil? Living, supporting the good, being a positive, active part of the trend toward rationality, toward progress, toward life enhancement, improved longevity, increased safety and security, more productivity, more innovation, more entertainment, more inspiration, more celebration, more happiness. And the reason why I'm an optimist is not because I believe all of those things, because those are my opinions. The reason why I'm an optimist is that advocacy and those beliefs, this idea that life is for living and not just for fighting evil, that is true to reality. And although free will is still a thing, and people can still do evil, and people do still do evil, they don't have reality on their side. And those of us who fight to make our lives better and to make the world better, those of us who fight personally and politically, those of us who advocate a rational philosophy and a moral code that leads to happiness, we have one thing on our side that the other side, whoever you regard as the other side, does not have. And it's the reason why Steven Pinker is right in The Better Angels of Our Nature. It's the reason why all of those statistics that we talk about actually have come to pass. It's the reason why there's even a book like Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, and Why It Matters. Why is there a book like this? Why is this a bestseller in 2021? Why are there so many reason and rationality-based communities inside and outside of philosophy, inside and outside of objectivism? Why is everything getting better all the time? One reason. We're right. We have reality on our side.
This makes sense.
People can fight reality. They can do the wrong thing. They can be evil. We could go through another dark ages. But frankly, so long as Ayn Rand's writings are possible, the work not just of the Ayn Rand Institute and other organizations that support her ideas, but everybody who's ever read her stuff and at least been inspired by it, if not completely convinced. So long as that happens, so long as we have a rationality community and books like this are being written, we are trending in the right direction. We talked about the availability heuristic or the availability bias. Yes, if you spend all of your time watching the news, if you have Fox News on all day, if you have CNN on all day, you will not see that trend.
And that's why it's important to watch what the Ayn Rand Center UK develops every single day for us on YouTube and all of the amazing shows. And I just want to say, become a member. Go to Ayn Rand Center, TRE.UK.
AynRandCenter.co.uk.
Thank you very much.
And other countries, it's not all .com.
Right.
They have country TDLs, top level TLDs, top level domains.
Yeah. So Ayn Rand's Center.
And Casey's right. That is a trippy cover. If I have anything against this book, it's like, why would you write a book on rationality?
You know what it
and
is?
make it so trippy. What the hell is up with that?
It's the 80s.
It looks very well.
It looks very 80s.
I know you would say that the 80s was the last fully rational period in history. Amy loves the 80s. I mean, I guess if you take off the slip cover, it looks like this.
Oh, okay. It's
I don't
pretty.
know why you would go with pale blue and pale green, but
it's very soothing colors.
It's not trippy.
Nope. No, but I like that. I think that's pretty cool.
I'm not done with the book yet, but because I'm 3/4 of the way through, I think I can definitely recommend the book. We'll talk about it again in a future episode.
And
talk about its strengths and weaknesses. It's 90% strengths. And the weaknesses will be they'll really be in the axioms of philosophy, because everything above and beyond the base of epistemology, Pinker gets right. And it's really going to come down to the philosophical differences.
Mm-hmm.
He even talks about axioms of rationality in the book, but they're not the axioms you'd recognize from objectivism. So I am looking forward to finishing it. I'm looking forward to going through it a second time, giving folks out there who might be curious about it some idea of, well, how does this align with objectivism? And Tazy says she's wearing a Madonna t-shirt right now, which,
great.
Apropos of the 80s, but also, our friend Angie put up a post recently about, I fell asleep with my t-shirt, for some rock band and woke up XYZ. So there's a whole string, go on Facebook, you'll find them out there, of jokes about that. And now I can't remember what any of the jokes were. But anyway, yes, take off that Van Halen t-shirt before you curse the band and they break up. Love that film, The Wedding Singer. The 80s really were the best decade.
They were. And you know what, speaking of the 80s and speaking how wonderful that was and how wonderful we are for loving the 80s and Madonna t-shirts and all of that, if you would like to support me and Robert directly, you are very much welcome to go to robertnasir.com and you can sign up to be a patron at Patreon, or you can make a one-time donation at PayPal or however, or you could just, send us some flowers or something. That would be really nice.
So when I decided to talk about optimism, and Amy and I were talking about this, she mentioned, well, in terms of practically implementing this perspective, because again, I talk about, well, what does that look like when I talk about life on Earth? What does it look like to put Ayn Rand's ideas into effect? Well, sometimes it means standing out in the street with a protest sign, but most of the time it means advancing your career.
Mm-hmm.
It means strengthening your friendships. It means making your relationships great. It means achieving success and happiness and wealth, and on whatever scale suits your values. So, which is why I always get into, well, what does that look like in reality? And Amy had some great ideas.
Yeah. And before I get into that, so Ayn Rand, to paraphrase her, she was asked, I believe it was in the Playboy interview by Alvin Toffler, something or other. She was asked, would you die for objectivism?
Yeah, would you be willing to die for your philosophy? She said, well, what's more important is I'm willing to live for it.
And that's much harder.
To
paraphrase her.
It's easy
so
to
why
die.
Is it, yeah, why? It's easy to die. It's easy to lay down your life, but it's so much harder to get up every morning, to get focused on what your values are, what your goals are, and actually have the courage to go out there and get what you want. That is really difficult. And to maintain integrity, to maintain honesty, to maintain rationality, to keep thinking about these things. And so when Robert said, I'm going to do a show on optimism, I had some thoughts, and I invite you to look at optimism, not necessarily as something that you would apply to just, politics or culture of the state of the world or however, but as a kind of virtue, very much in line with patience, which is highly contextual, and sometimes it works in some situations and sometimes it doesn't. But optimism is just exactly like that. So I came up with a scenario in terms of goal setting. So, and first, let me just say what optimism is. It's for me, it's believing in or projecting out a good outcome, a positive outcome. And the definition says, in the dictionary says, hopefulness and confidence about the future of the successful outcome of something. So I came up with this concept here. Let me run it by you. Maybe you can consider it for your own life as optimism, as something that you can actually act on as kind of a contextual virtue. So in goal setting, come up with possible steps to achieve the goal. And that's obviously a really good idea. Any goal setting, coach will tell you this. Break it down into smaller steps. So with each step, anticipate any obstacles or worst case scenarios that might hinder each step. So look at each step and try to figure out what's going to go wrong with this possibly, and basically match it up to what you know is real, to the reality of the situation. So here you're not being pessimistic when you're kind of critiquing your steps, but you're being realistic. You're bringing reality in and making sure that each step is generally consistent with what actually does happen in reality. And then you can go in, and then after you've thought about all of that, anticipating worst case scenarios and obstacles, you can go in, you can edit each step. And you can keep editing as far as, don't edit forever. You have to decide at some point what you're going to be doing and what your journey is going to look like to achieve your goal. So then, before proceeding with these steps, do something, don't just rush in. So what you can do is you can apply the virtue, as it were, of optimism and positively visualize the best outcome of each step. So use your imagination and try to play out each step happening smoothly and confidently. And this will help you gain confidence, which will help. So in the case of you're trying to convince somebody to give you what you need, whether that's a raise or a promotion or some other job or something, anything, you're going to go into that conversation with confidence, and that's going to help that person that you're talking to that's going to help them to be confident in you. So when you visualize and use your imagination to kind of say to yourself, what is the best case scenario here? What do all these steps look like in the best case scenario? What does the positive outcome look like? And so basically, that is my theory. And you are very much welcome to take that and send us tons of money for that advice, because I'm sure it's very valuable. Perhaps I'll write a book someday, and maybe somebody has already actually come up with this. So most times optimism applies to goal setting, but it can also apply to convincing people of rational ideas. And when you do that, you should have a positive, confident, can-do attitude, because that's going to show that person that you actually do believe in what you want, and you have a positive vision of something, which is invaluable. So the bottom line here is, if the world is to change, and we have this amazing philosophy that we have as this a resource, and we have reality on our side to boot, if the world is to change, it will be because people use this positive outlook to motivate themselves to create change. And actually, you'll see that in the motivation of Steven Pinker writing his books. So there it is for your consideration. Optimism is a virtue.
Excellent. There's a conversation going on that having a hard time following, but they're saying, I'm sick of masks. And
what?
Is anybody required to wear masks anymore? Here in Motown, you don't have to wear masks. If you're sick of masks, you just don't wear a mask. Does anybody make you wear a mask anymore?
They do.
Where do they make you wear masks anymore?
And
on an airplane.
In schools with children who are unable to be vaccinated just yet.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize anybody was still requiring masks. Well, sorry to hear that, folks out there.
Hugs to all you school teachers out there.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against wearing a mask. I just didn't realize they were still required anywhere but on airplanes.
Yeah. That's very true.
All right. Well, we'll keep hoping for improvements as things continue to get better. And one thing I know is that they will. The only thing I don't know is what does the timeline look like on that. But we will get through this. We've gotten as far as we have. It's interesting to go through 2020, notes from 2020, photographs, what things looked like. It's a wonder that we got through as well as we did. And we will get through 2021 as well. Keep fighting for the right stuff so that we don't have too much harm done in the meantime. You know, the stock market, was it in April or May of 2020, was down in the 17,000s. If you had bought during that dip, I bought a little, not enough, you would have doubled your money as of right about now. How is the stock? I know the stock market is not an objective measure, but it's a measure. It's got something to do with something. It's a wonder that the economy is as strong as it is.
It is a wonder.
But this COVID business will eventually be addressed, fully addressed. It won't be over, but it will be managed. It will eventually be more like other diseases out there, the flu and the cold and the other things, as we get more and more antivirals that can bring it down to that level of lethality and inconvenience. And that might be in 6 months, hopefully less than that, but maybe more than that. Either way, it's going to happen. And what I wonder is, well, what does the stock market look like then? Do I finally get my flying car? Because it's going to be amazing. I feel like the future looks like Yaron Brooks' cell phone. No, because we talk about the cell phone, that we're all carrying supercomputers in our pockets. But you know, sometimes with the news, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whoever, pick your poison, we start feeling like, well, the only big improvements that are coming are bad ones. You know, climate change or artificial intelligence goes haywire and takes over the world. And we forget that more miracles are right around the corner. And we don't know, because 10 years before the iPhone, you didn't know what that was going to look like.
Right.
Hell, 10 years, 20 years before that, a cell phone looked like a brick in your hand. We didn't know before 2010 that somebody was going to get tablets right. Now everybody makes them, but before the iPad came out, was not a thing. And all the other things I can't even think of that we're just used to now. You know, computers in our cars and backup cameras and just stuff that we just think is normal now, like flat screen televisions. It's funny, well, people will bring up in the chat, well, Robert, you're ignoring CRT. And I'm like, I got rid of my last CRT 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh, what was it, like the 386 processor? And
386s were amazing.
Yeah.
I remember the 8088s. And then the 8086 and then the 8186.
And those beautiful, just glorious monitors that were just extended way like a mile away.
I was a computer technician at the time, so I know exactly what they weighed, believe me.
Oh, so I want to give a shout out to Kathleen. Thank you. She says, for keeping the lights on in dark times.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And Tazy says, go 80s and the new roaring 20s coming up.
Weren't the 80s amazing? They really were.
Yes.
Although it's funny, pick any year, whatever you think your favorite year was, 1984 or 1974, and go back and look up what the top 40 were. And 10 of those songs in the top 40 will like make your heart beat, and you'll be in love, and you'll be like, you're right, that was the best year ever. And the other 30 songs in the top 40, you'll be like, oh crap, I forgot we were listening to that too. So selective memory is a thing. But yeah, the 80s were amazing. The 70s are pretty damn good too. I could go through why the 70s were awesome as well, but
except for the draft and the gas lines.
Except for the draft and the gas lines and the Vietnam War.
And the ugly polyester olive green clothing.
And Richard Nixon and the final nail in the coffin of the gold standard. And yeah, impeachment and Jimmy Carter, the 4 years of Jimmy Carter and the hostage crisis. And remember, you can only buy gasoline every other day if the date matched the last number on your driver's license number. And yeah, Mr. Reardon says stagflation in the 1970s. What do you mean stagflation? Well, we had inflation, but then we had stagflation. The economy sucked, even though they managed to keep the value of the dollar stable. What the hell? And nobody could get a job, and unemployment was crazy. And remember, credit card interest rates of 20% and crazy. Well, that was the 70s was when the income tax rates finally came down. Before that, highest marginal rate was 90%.
Yeah.
Crazy. Anyway,
yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Without getting too much into that, we keep coming back to, why are you optimistic? Well, for every frigging reason out there except for the news headlines,
right,
which are the smallest part of the picture. So thank you for joining us in this conversation. Again, I heartily recommend Steven Pinker's latest book, but if you're interested in the issue of optimism, not just rationality, but his previous book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, in which he will go through every statistic that you need to know in order to realize, holy hell, not only has everything and by every single measure gotten better in the last 50 years, the last 100 years, the last 200 years throughout history, but almost inconceivably so. Not just better, but better at rates that are jaw-dropping, almost seem impossible, unless you've studied objectivism and you understand the power of human reason and what it looks like when you get 8.4 billion people to be at least reasonable, if not fully rational.
Yeah.
This is all good, Mon. It's life on Earth. And that was life on Earth. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to wrap now, and we're going to go over to Clubhouse. If you want to talk to us in person, if you've been wanting to say, oh, wait, we had another super chat we have to call out from Mary Elaine. She says government controls water, sewer, electricity. Scary. That's interesting to me too, because she's absolutely right. It's interesting because A, the government doesn't control it directly. It's mostly through franchises granted to, like around here, DTE or Detroit Edison or Consumer Power, whoever does the gas, whoever does the electric, whoever does the water. You're right. It's inextricably tied in with the government. But it's interesting to me too, because if you were around in the 1980s, if you were around in the 1970s, and I had said to you, someday you will buy bottles of water.
What? That's stupid. I get it from the tap.
Bottled water. And again, electricity and gas, and you're seeing now private ways of getting around these government granted franchises. As things develop, you will see that more and more. And if we go through a period where things get worse, you will see it accelerate. You will see solar power not in the government granted franchise sense of, oh, we'll give you a tax credit, because none of this actually makes any sense. No, you will see practical solar power. You will see practical substitutes for the kinds of things that are government monopolies. And they're not fully government monopolies. They are franchises, which means they're a mess. But could be even worse. We're not fully a dictatorship in that regard. So thank you for that last super chat. And let me just scroll, make sure that really is the last one, because we're going over to Clubhouse.
Yes.
If you wanted to yell at me, if you wanted to talk to me, now you can do it by voice on the Clubhouse platform. We're going to go ahead and fire up that room. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank our producer behind the scenes, Dylan.
Yes.
I want to say the future, oh my God, compare right now to 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago. The future is going to be, I'm sorry, Leonard Peikoff, I am a realist, but I am also an optimist. The future is going to be amazing. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye, everybody. We will see you on Clubhouse in about, call it 30 seconds. We'll see you in a minute.